Hey guys, Unseen Hero here, and bring guys another Pokemon X and Y Wi-Fi battle against Clerville. Let's jump right into the team analysis, starting with my team. I brought my Carbink to be a specially defensive wall. I brought my Farfetch just for the fun, but it is physically offensive. I brought an Assault Vest Electros. I brought my Electrode, which set around some Thunder Wave since my team is not too fast. I have my Arcanine because it is the best Pokemon ever and should be brought to every Pokemon battle. And my Mega Medicham, which is physically offensive since I don't think there's any other set you can run on one. Taking a look at my opponent's team, you can see the Greninja, which it must be Life Orb special attacker like the other sets. We see the Darmanitan, which must be choiced in one way, Banded or Scarfed. We have the Rotom, which is a wall. We have the Venusaur, which I assume to be the Mega Venusaur since he has no other potential Megas on his team, and that would be his best stat. We have the Dragonite with the multi-scale, and I bet it has the weakness policy as well, or leftovers depending on what set it's running. And the Jirachi, which I always assume is the Serene Gray's para-flinching set. Now nothing on his team scares me too much, but his team is well built, so I was anticipating a very intense battle where a prediction would be needed. Let's get started here. I decided to lead off with my Carbink because I know I wanted to get my Stealth Rocks as soon as possible to break Dragonite's multi-scale, and my opponent leads off with the Jirachi. And as you can see, this turn we both set up our Stealth Rocks, and this is not good for me or him, as none of us have a Defogger or Rapid Spinner on our teams. I decide to stay in and go for the Light Screen, while my opponent goes for the Iron Head, and this does way more damage than I thought it would, bringing me down to the red zone, while I go up for the Light Screen, and I do get it up, and I do get some leftover recovery. I knew another Iron Head was coming, so I decided to switch out my Carbink into my Arcanine since it's a physically defensive set, and I'm able to get off the Intimidate, and my opponent does go for the Iron Head, which is not very effective. As you can see, the Stealth Rocks did more damage than the Iron Head. I decided to go for the Will-O-Wisp this turn. I knew that 5 of the 6 Pokemon my opponent brought could be burned, and if the Jirachi did stay, then good for me. If not, something else would be burned. And he switches into his Rotom, and since my Rotom can be paralyzed by my Electrode, this is honestly the second best status ailment I could get, second to Toxic, of course. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, some plays would be needed for me to win this battle, and this would be one of them. I knew my opponent would assume I would assume he would go for the Hydro Pump, so I actually predicted him to go for another move, expecting that. So I decided to go in for the Roar over here, so I take the Volt Switch without a problem, switches out into Darmanitan, which takes the Stealth Rock damage, and as I go for the Roar, his Jirachi comes out, and it takes some Stealth Rock damage, and it's a good matchup against my Arcanine. He decided to stay in this turn and go for the Thunder Wave, which confirms that it is a para-flinching set, but fortunately enough for me, I'm able to get my Morning Sun back, and my lovely puppies back at full HP. Opponent is able to get a string of successful para-flinches. I just stayed in, knowing that his Iron Heads would do barely anything to me. So I just go for the Will-O-Wisp, hoping that if I got that 30-20% chance of not being para-flinched, that I would get off the Will-O-Wisp, but unfortunately that doesn't happen, and he switches out into his Rotom after he sees that the damage his Iron Head is doing is abysmal to me, and he switches out into his Rotom to take the Will-O-Wisp. Now I need to preserve my Arcanine for his Jirachi as it is a good counter for it. So my Carbink just became dead fodder. I decided to send it in. I knew my opponent wouldn't over-predict like the last time and go for a Volt Switch, and I do predict correctly as he goes for the Hydro Pump, easily able to knock out my Carbink as it did have 15 HP after his Stealth Rock, and I decided to send in my little warrior, my Farfetch. If you did not know, when you put Stick on Farfetch, it increases his critical chance by 2, and Leaf Blade has an increased critical hit chance, so when you have a Stick and you use Leaf Blade, it always gets a critical hit. So I get the critical hit on the Rotom, which might seem like pointless, but it does help as it brings it down to the point where even after Leftovers recovery, the burn will knock it out. So the Farfetch was really important in that play, knocking out the Rotom later in the game. So my opponent decided to switch on to his Darmanitan, and my only physically defensive Pokemon is Arcanine. So I decided to set it in, get the Intimidate off, and hopefully nothing bad happens. So now I was confident my Arcanine could take any attack from this Darmanitan after Intimidate, and my opponent goes for the Earthquake. I was really hoping he wasn't carrying it, but at the end it doesn't really matter since I'm able to live, and I go for the Roar, and luckily for me the Rotom is brought out and the Stealth Rocks knocks it out. My opponent decides to bring in his Darmanitan to face against my Arcanine again, but this time it would not be at -1, but it does have to take another set of Stealth Rocks damage, so it's at 25% HP remaining. I predicted my opponent to go for the Earthquake this turn since that's what he did the last turn and would be able to knock me out. So I decided to switch out to my Electros, knowing that he would be choice, so he would have to switch out after, but he actually goes for a Flare Blitz, which is able to knock out my Electros, but the damage he takes from the Flare Blitz recoil knocks him out as well. We both now have to make a blind switch in, so I decided to switch in my Electrode since getting paralysis on any of his Pokemon at this point would be a positive for me, while my opponent decides to go into his Jirachi. This turn I decided to go for a Thunder Wave, knowing that anything on his team could be paralyzed and that would be good for me. My opponent decides to go out into the Venusaur. I'm not too sure why. I guess he saw it as a good matchup against my Electrode, but for me it doesn't really matter as now he has a paralyzed Venusaur. Now my opponent activates his Mega Ring, which does reveal the Mega Venusaur, which is what I assumed at the beginning of the match in the team analysis. And I go for the taunt expecting the Leech Seed, and my opponent gets paralyzed luckily, so I'm not too sure what he even went for. Now I wanted to keep my Electrode to spread around some paralysis on his team, so I decided to Volt Switch into my Arcanine as Death Fodder as the Stealth Rocks takes him out, and my opponent misses his Sludge Bomb as there is no target. I decided to switch into my Medicham since a Mega Evolved Medicham has the best odds of taking out a Mega Venusaur with a Zen Headbutt. Now this turn I do go for the Zen Headbutt, and it is very obvious as my opponent does see that and go out for his Greninja since it is immune, and I knew he would do this play, but if I went for the high jump kick and he did stay in, my Mega Medicham would faint since the high jump kick would not be able to take out a Mega Venusaur, and his Sludge Bomb or whatever Giga Drain would be able to knock me out without a problem, and at this point Mega Medicham is my win condition. I was fearing a Dark Pulse this turn, knowing that Greninja could outspeed a Mega Medicham, so I decided to go in for my Electrode. Hopefully I'm able to take a hit, but my opponent doesn't actually go for any attack and he goes for the Toxic Spikes. Now knowing that Electrode is one of the fastest Pokemon out there, I go for the Thunderbolt, and I thought it would be able to knock out the Greninja, but surprisingly it doesn't, and my opponent's able to attack back with an Ice Beam, which leaves me in the red with 24 HP. This turn I decided to go for a Thunderbolt, knowing that last turn I did over 50%, and my opponent decides to switch out into his Dragonite, and the Stealth Rocks is able to break his Multiscale, so my Thunderbolt does its full damage. Since my opponent brought in the Dragonite against my Electrode, I assumed that it had the Extreme Speed, so I decided to let him go for the Extreme Speed, and my Aftermath ability kicks in and he takes some damage, which brings him down to the red, and now I'm able to bring out my Mega Medicham, but unfortunately it does get poisoned by the one layer of Toxic Spikes. Now the play my opponent does this turn defines the outcome of the battle. If he had gone for the Extreme Speed, he would be able to do a considerable amount of damage to my Mega Medicham since it is a frail Pokemon, and then after over time the poison damage would be able to knock me out. But he doesn't do that and he decides to switch out, so my Mega Medicham has the opportunity to knock out all of his Pokemon, and once he finally brings in his Dragonite, the Stealth Rocks is able to knock him out. As I said, my Mega Medicham would be my winning condition, and it was, as it is my last Pokemon standing and it is able to knock out the rest of his team. Now I want to thank Clerville for the battle, as it was a really great battle, and obviously he knew what he was doing. So thank you very much, Clerville, or hopefully I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Hopefully it is Clerville. And I want to thank you guys for watching, and that's all I got to say for today. Thank you guys for watching, and seeing you here.